Hey, and welcome to the Tom's Hardware Show. I'll try not to touch my table so it doesn't shake. I'm Jared Walton, your host as always, and your loner for the day. I'm all alone, but I've got company. I've got company in the form of some boxes. This is the 7900 XT and the 7900 XTX. Two boxes, virtually identical in size. Well, they are identical in size as far as I can tell, but the boxes are not the same. Here, we'll start with the little one. I've already unboxed these and looked at them and tested them a little bit, but I can't talk about testing. I should check and make sure there's no comments here. Yes, Coco Sloan. It is Sloan. It is real. So, this is the XT. That opens just like a box. The XTX, it has an extra feature. That's what the extra X is for. Ready? You might not see it the first time, so we'll try and go slow. Can you even see that? See how it lifts up at the back? Whoa! That's the only difference. See, there's like this little tray as you open it that lifts up on the XTX card, and on the XT there is no padded elevator tray. That's the only real difference in the boxes. The cards themselves, they are not the same, obviously. We've already looked at the cards at AMD's event in November. Let me just hold these up for a second. The slightly shorter top one is the XT, and the bottom one is the XTX. They're mostly similar size. Let's see if I can get these together that way. So it's a little bit taller and a little bit longer for the XTX. That's the main difference. I do have pictures. I took pictures because pictures are worth 1,000 words. Actually, pictures are going to be better than me holding these things up in front of the camera. So let's go ahead and... Oh, yeah, we've got some hate already. Not for me. Don't care, too expensive, not worth the price they are asking. And he's left. Thanks, Tactical Center. And they are expensive. I mean, there's estimates that have been tossed out that their BOM, their bill of materials, is probably in the $400 to $500 range. NVIDIA's RTX 4080 bill of materials is probably also in that $500 range. I would say NVIDIA's is probably more expensive just for the materials, simply by virtue of the fact that they have a massive heatsink for the Founders Edition. The 4090 bill of materials would be a little bit higher than the 4080 just because it has a larger die and it has more memory, and I guess a lot more. It's probably in the $600 range is my estimate. But that doesn't account for research and development, and research and development is expensive as anything. Like, you got to deal with all the cost of creating and designing cutting-edge GPUs on the latest process technology, and that's not cheap. And they've got lots of people working on it. Anyway, let's talk pictures, unboxing. So this is the XTX, the box. If you ever buy a card off of eBay or something and you get something like this with a blank UPC spot, that means you probably bought a reviewer sample, and then you should tell people that the jerkwad is selling reviewer samples that are not for resale. Here's a picture of it opening. The card itself, triple fans. I'm flipping through these pretty quick because there's not a whole lot to say that's different here. The cards are solid. This is interesting. I don't know if this is only on reviewer samples or if this will be on all of them, but they put on like the security number, part number, and extra details. They put it on the IO bracket, which is a little interesting. Like I don't know. I've probably seen that somewhere before, but that's not the usual place for it, just because, I don't know, it makes it a little less clean looking if you see the back of the computer, but that's usually not clean anyway. 2 DisplayPort 2.1, 54 gigabits per second, 1 HDMI 2.1 with, I believe, 48 gigabits per second, and then there's the USB-C that also supports DisplayPort 2.1, 54 gigabits per second. And then, the back of the card, not too much to say. You got dual 8-pin power connectors, so maximum power of 150 watts each plus 75 watts from the PCI Express slot means 375 watt total. You can pull more power than 150 watts from the 8-pin connectors. Like basically most cable harnesses, I should grab one, but most cable harnesses from your PSU will have 2 8-pin connectors on a single cable strand, which means they're using like 16 gauge or even 14 gauge wire, and so they're rated for 300 watts on their cables, and so you could pull more power, but that's for overclocking. We'll worry about that on another day. Yeah, so there you go. That's a 7900 XTX. Oh, and it weighs basically 1,800 grams, 1.8 kilograms. It's pretty heavy. The XT is quite a bit lighter, as we'll get to in a moment. So XT card, again, I'm just going to click through these fast because they're all virtually identical. It's a nice looking card. Yeah, like John Smith in the chat says, looks good. And I agree. Like, I like the look. You got some RGB lighting options, but it's not all over the place. And it's a clean looking design. Nothing super fancy because, a lot of extra frills and bling aren't going to make the card any faster. And for most people, you're not really going to do or see much else. Like if you're worried about decorating your interior of your PC and making it look nicer, there might be other cards that you would like more, or you can just go full blown case modding and do whatever you want. Yeah, same port connections on the XT, same dual 8-pin power connectors, no adapters required, and I think this is the weight, yeah, 1525 grams, so almost 300, I guess 275 grams less. And yeah, that's about that for the initial stuff. Now, we can talk about things that AMD has said in the past, and so, people are going to obviously want to know what performance is like, and I can't share our own independent benchmarks yet. I'm still running them. Obviously, the card's not in there right now, but that's my existing test bed. And let's talk test beds for a minute because things have changed. 13900K is out, 7950X is out, and they might offer more performance. And I've got both in the labs for testing, and I don't have enough time to get the testing done before the launch. These are launching on December 13th, so next Tuesday. There's no way I can finish retesting everything on the new platforms. My goal is to test, retest, whatever. I'm going to test the 4090 and the 4080 and the two 7900 series cards. But those 4 cards, I'm going to try and test both of those on 7950X and 13900K just to see, like, is there an AMD on AMD advantage versus Intel on, or NVIDIA on Intel, NVIDIA on AMD. I don't know. AMD on Intel. I don't know yet. AMD seems to think there is, and I wouldn't doubt that. Like, they're in control of the X670E platform, so they have the ability to tune things a little better with their smart access memory instead of resizable bar. And this comparison shot I do like because you can see here a little more clearly how the XT is definitely shorter and a little, it's not as long and it's not as wide from this angle. And then you got the 4080 and 4090 bracketing the outsides, and those are just huge triple slot cards by comparison. Yeah. let's see. So performance. I can't talk our own performance, but I can talk. Let's see. There's another shot of the two cards next to each other. I can talk other performance, but I want to talk about our new test bed for a moment. So let's see. I'm gonna grab my camera for a second so you can see this. I'm in crunch mode. That right there is the new test beds. They're busy, or they're going to be busy. I've got. I'm actually retesting the 3090 Ti, trying to do some benchmarks on that, as well as the 6950 XT, just to give like as many comparison points as I can. And it's got spaghetti wires all over the place, but I do have NVIDIA's new PCAT V2 as well that allows me to do real-time power monitoring, and it's an interposer, like it has an interposer in between the PCIe connection and the graphics card, so that you intercept that power, and then you also put the 8-pin, or if you had it 16-pin cables through the device as well, the PCAT device, and it's the power capture and analysis tool, and so that captures your real-time power use. So, and again, to show you, sorry, that's my old power testing setup. All those white wires in the back and the little bricklets in the front, those are for the Powenetic system, which works fine. It's plenty accurate. The only problem with that is I have to run it as a separate process, not process, but like a separate test. PCAT links into FrameView, and FrameView is built off of PresentMon, like AMD's OCAT, but FrameView captures, if you've got it, your PCAT output. And so while I'm capturing my benchmark frame times, I also capture now power, which is kind of cool. So we'll be able to give a little bit more in-depth look at power. I've been showing this Sabrent slide for a while. Sorry, I haven't talked about it. So, new test bed. Got a 4 terabyte Sabrent Rocket 4 Plus G in there. They sent me this massive heatsink for it as well. I mean, it's not massive, but, you know, help keep it cool, whatever. And I've got the 13900K in there. You can see the Sabrent sitting there. Beneath it, along with some Trident Z GDDR5, sorry, not GDDR, just DDR5. This is a DDR5 6600 memory. And then here's the Sabrent installed, and it's got its heatsink on it now. It's a big old chunker. And there's a problem with this heatsink. So that's the 4090 sitting in there next to it. And I swap graphics cards all the time, so I need easy access to the graphics card release, and I couldn't get at it. So I ended up taking off the heatsink and just using the built-in MSI heatsink, which should be fine. Anything else to say? No, that's about it for the test bed. The one test bed. I'm actually still getting the AMD system up and running, because you got to copy over all the files, all the games, and all that stuff. Like, I've got almost 2 terabytes of games in my test suite, so that takes a while. So actually, I'm going to stick the SSD for the other test bed into this test bed and copy the files direct that way, because it should go a lot faster. Performance. This is what AMD has said. I don't know if they're in any particular order here. So up to 82% more performance in ray tracing versus their 6950 XT. And they showed these are demanding. Well, I don't know about Resident Evil Village as much. Obviously, when you're getting 94 frames per second at 4K native, that tells you that the ray tracing's not doing a lot. Ray tracing calculations are complex. Do they make enough of a difference to warrant their use? I mean, in real-time games, there's those who say no, and there's those who say yes. I think a lot of the people who say no are the ones who don't have an RTX 4090 or 4080 even. Like, you need a really beefy graphics card to get the most out of ray tracing at 4K. And that's why you've got DLSS or FSR, which is what this slide is about, because FSR helps. And it helps a lot more when you're running at lower frame rates. So you can see FSR in performance mode in Resident Evil Village takes the XTX from 135 to 201. So about a 50% improvement. Whereas in Dying Light 2, it takes it from 24 to 72, which is, let's see, 48 is doubled. That's a tripling of performance. Same with the, yeah, so, you know, you can get much bigger gains in scenarios where you are severely performance handicapped. Same, almost tripling of performance in Cyberpunk 2077. And not quite triple, but at least more than double in Hitman 3. I think at 4K, I think it's reasonable to say upscaling is kind of required for ray tracing to work optimally. Whether that's DLSS or XESS or FSR, FSR2, it's not really that important. Oh, this was what? Oh, this is their rasterization slide. So this is interesting. Cyberpunk 726043, you know, at native 4K without ray tracing, you're getting more performance than 1080p upscaled with ray tracing. A couple other slides here. This was, I guess they already kind of showed that. Yeah. And then this was their overall slide. They're saying over 50% faster than a 6950 XT at 4K in ray tracing or in not ray tracing. That will probably depend on the game. So, you know, there are going to be games that run into CPU bottlenecks, and then they won't be 50% faster, like Flight Simulator. I mean, that's an easy one to point out. I don't know what the numbers are, but you know, on the 4090 and 4080, they're both basically maxed out in the, I think, 79, 80 something range on performance, because that's as fast as the CPU can generate the frames. And so, you know, DLSS 3 frame generation can get past that limit, but it's creating kind of fake frames. They don't increase the smoothness. Speaking of, I want to talk about frame generation for a minute, because Portal RTX just came out this week, and I did limited testing with it. I mean, it's a fun game. Like, Portal was a great game when it was released, and so now you've got the Portal RTX. That's the same game as far as I could tell. I mean, I don't think they changed any of the gameplay dynamics. They just added ray tracing, and the ray tracing looks nice. It's actually full path tracing, so it's like what they did in Minecraft and Quake 2. And it's super, super demanding. So at 4K native on a 4090, Portal RTX is running at like 20-ish frames per second, like 20 to 24 maybe, depending on the scene. So then you need to enable DLSS, or I guess you could, it probably only supports DLSS. I'm trying to remember now. DLSS upscaling, and even quality mode is only going to get you maybe 30 frames per second on a 4090. So you go to performance mode, so you're 1080p upscaled to 4K, and now you're in that 60 frames per second range. And then you add on frame generation, and you get up to like 90 to 100 frames per second. If you don't do DLSS upscaling and just do frame generation, you go from 22 to 40-ish frames per second. It still feels exactly like 22 frames per second. It might look a little better, but because the frame generation is not increasing your input sampling is still going at the old the lower 22 frames per second rate, and so it doesn't feel good. So you really need to get your input sampling rate or your base frame rate up to at least 30 to 40 frames per second before frame generation won't feel horribly slow on the input. So yay. I gotta block. Let's see, where's my little dot? Maybe someone already blocked them. Someone's spamming. Yeah, someone must have already blocked that spam. All right, questions. Do I have it? Oh my gosh. Sorry. Matt Codger, face. He asks, what PSU am I using? Oh, I'm using this, the Dark Power Pro 12. And I'm trying to pull it out so I can show you. This is, I mean, it's a monster. It really is. They give you so many cables with it too, like 16 pin. I think there's two 16-pin cables, and then there's like 4 8-pin harnesses that can each do 2 8-pins, so up to 8 8-pin connectors. I actually have 2 of these. Thanks. Silent power. Not silent power. Sorry. Be quiet. They're both about noise. Sorry. So this is the PSU I'm using. I don't know if you can read that. It's a 1500 watt beast. It's 80 plus titanium. It's basically as high end as you can go on a PSU. And it has, like I was saying, let's see, which way is the best way to show that? This way? You probably can't read that still. So it's got the 2 top ones are your new PCIe 16-pin connectors. Yeah. Then there's the motherboard stuff on the bottom. OCK, I don't even know what that. I guess that's the cable to do something. Motherboard connectors as well. So, yeah. Anyway, it's actually really sharp edges too. Like these are. It's a really nice looking power supply though. So I got one of those in the 13900K. I've got a Corsair H1500i, AX1500i. I don't remember the exact model name off the top of my head, but I've got that, which will power the AMD test bed. Yeah, heavy hangover, my poor head. Let's see. Can I give you a hint? I can't give you a hint other than I can say, look at AMD's own numbers. I mean, so here's... Sorry. Let me get this out of my way so I can face you. Okay, box out of the way. Yeah. Am I happy with the performance results? I can't tell you. But the thing that everyone is curious about, and we'll find out next week, is how does this scale relative to RDNA 2? And, you know, even AMD's own numbers raise some questions. Like, let me see. I want to show, yeah, this one. So, you're seeing good generational gains, 50% maybe, let's call it. But the strange thing when you look at the specs, that's where it gets odd, because the total bandwidth of the XTX is 960 gigabytes per second versus 576 gigabytes per second on the 6950 XT. So that's 67% more bandwidth. And then the real kicker is teraflops. The XTX is theoretically 61.4 FP32 teraflops compared to 23.7 FP32 teraflops. It's 160% more compute on paper. And you know, AMD's sitting here saying 50 to 70%, up to 82% more performance, which, you know, maybe that's the outlier or whatever. So even if you say 50%, it's like, well, what's happening here? Like, it, based off bandwidth and compute, you would think that it would be at least 70% faster. Maybe we're running into CPU scaling issues. Maybe there's other things holding it back. Maybe the what do you call it? The Infinity Fabric. So Infinity Fabric sounds like what AMD said at their presentations to us last month. They didn't put chiplets and Infinity Fabrics into GPUs to boost performance. Like, no one ever said, hey, doing chiplets is faster. It's more scalable. Like on the CPU side, it's more scalable. You can add a second, compute chiplet on the CPU side and double your number of cores. On the graphics side, they're saying they're not even doing more compute with chiplets. They're doing more cache and more memory connections. But then they have to build this Infinity Fabric to talk between the two. And so this is, and again, no spoilers on performance. This is just looking at AMD's, and I want to see what my own testing looks like, and I want to see, like, if it's got 160% more compute, raw compute, can you actually use that even in hypothetical or even in compute-based scenarios? Like, I guess we don't have GPU mining anymore, but it's like, is there some task that you can feed it that will show performance that's maybe closer to 2.6 times faster than a 6950 XT? I don't know. I will look for that. But AMD didn't show anything in the slides that they've given us that they've shown publicly. So it's an interesting question, and I think the answer is probably going to be that the chiplet architecture was done to save on cost and perhaps make future scaling better. I mean, like I've speculated before, they could do a next generation part GCD on TSMC N3 next year if they really wanted to. Make a bigger GCD, and then they could just link that up to the same MCDs that they're already using, because they don't need to make the MCDs smaller for, let's call it Navi 30. They've not said that they're making a Navi 30, so this is just like, I'm saying they could shrink the GCD, make it bigger, make it more cores, make it even more MCD interfaces, so they could go up to 8 or, I don't know, 10. That would be a lot of memory. Could you imagine that? You'd have, let's see, each GCD or each MCD links to 4 gigabytes of memory. So if you had 10, you'd have 40 gigabyte card, unless you used 1 gigabyte chips. But whatever. They could do that, right? And the MCDs, they're already done. They would still work fine. And you would just have more cache, more memory links with a bigger GCD, except that you would shrink the GCD by making it on N3. So balance those costs out. I don't know. I think that's really about all I have to say. Let's see. Overview viewer with 13900K plus XTX was drawing a bit too much for 850 watt, and the system was finicky. With an XTX, I wouldn't think they should talk about power yet, but I mean, it depends on the quality of your power supply as well. Like my old power test system that I showed, it's a 9900K, so a lot lower on the CPU power potentially. And it's an 850 watt Seasonic Focus G, 850 watt platinum. And, the wall power draw on that when testing a 4090 overclocked was hitting like 800 to 850 watts, which even after you factor in efficiency, and so the actual power output from it would have been, more like 770 watts. So I had spare headroom on a 9900K for power testing, and I could run Furmark and stuff where it wouldn't really hit the CPU. But yeah, that's been a concern of mine for the last, I don't know, 6 months, maybe more, where I was like going, I might be running into power limits soon because my 850 watt power test bed. And this is why I'm glad I've got NVIDIA's PCAT V2 in place, because A, it doesn't require me to do soldering, and B, it's a little less janky than the Pownetics stuff that I had to put together, and C, I don't have to cut cables. So the Pownetics stuff, I had to take the cable harness from the PSU, snip it in half, put one side into the bricklet and the other side out to the GPU, which was messy. And it just, it's nice to not have to do that. I couldn't do anything else. I could have gotten like adapters and cut those maybe, but anyway. So that's all I've got for this show. Obviously, we'll be back next week with the full performance. As much performance as I can get tested. And that brings up another thing. I'm frustrated. Games, stop changing your damn code. Like, every now and then, it's okay to, like, hey, we're going to do a major update. But in the past 2 months, I've seen Forza Horizon 5 performance has gone all over the place. I mean, this is the 4090, so, already released and reviewed. At launch, at 1080p medium, well, it's not actually medium. It was 1080p high setting. I saw 254 frames per second. I just retested that today, latest drivers, but the game got patched, and the patched version got, instead of 254 frames per second, and this is kind of boggling my mind because I'm like, what changed? It got 200 frames per second. No, it got 193 frames per second. I also tested the 4090 last week, I think. And I mean, it got 212 frames per second. So I don't know what they're doing with Forza Horizon 5, but performance has changed and then changed and then changed. And it's really irritating because it invalidated all of my existing test results. So I now have to test all the cards I want to put in the review. I have to retest them on Forza. I have to also do that for Total War Warhammer 3. And Fortnite, they totally borked everything. It was one of my ray tracing games. Now they've shifted to Unreal Engine 5.1, and they've enabled their Lumos. Wait, is it Lumos? Their Nanite, Lumos Nanite system, I think it's called. It still supports hardware ray tracing, kind of. And I say kind of because if you go into creative mode, it doesn't allow you to enable Lumos. Except it kind of does, because if you load into the map and then you go and you apply the epic settings, it tries to enable Lumos, but it doesn't work. And so like the reflections are screwed up and all these things break and everything falls apart. So goodbye, Fortnite. I'm not testing you anymore. I'm done. It has changed so many times over the past several years, and like they can't even keep anything stable. Maps change, everything changes. There was a benchmark map that I was using that I was like, oh, finally, I've got something I can keep going back to. They broke that a couple months ago with an update, and then I switched to a different benchmarking map to make things easier, and they broke that as well now because they don't support creative having ray tracing. And yeah, it's just a mess. They'll probably figure it out, but that's why we won't have Fortnite performance. Let's see. They didn't talk about power. Oh, okay. Let's see. It's 2-pin on these new cards. I'm looking at my comments here. And let's see. I think that's it. Yeah. So you can draw more than, I mean, in spec, from a single 8-pin connector to a graphics card, it's supposed to be 150 watt. But from the power supply side, the power supplies are built to supply 300 watts over that same cable because they've got 2 connectors. And probably build in some extra headroom. I mean, when you look at the 16-pin 600 watt cables and you look at the 8-pin cables that do 2 150 watt connectors, in a lot of cases, I'm like, they're not that different. And so I think there are power supplies that probably reasonably could supply up to 600 watts over a single 8-pin connector. But then that that power density might heat up and there might be other concerns, and so no one does that because that wasn't spec, and so the new 16 pin was designed with 600 watts as the spec. Yeah. Speaking of Forza, I should also note this, like power use in Forza's all over the map. Like my latest testing, where is it here? So Forza running on the 3990 Ti. This is running on the 4090, sorry. Maximum power use I saw from the 4090 at 4K was 270 watts. GPU utilization of 84%. Back earlier, at launch, I saw, the retest I did last week was similar power and utilization, but the initial launch review, where's that? I'm trying to find my numbers here. The launch review, I was seeing higher power use in some cases, but those are on factory overclock cards. Okay, so yeah, Forza doesn't use your GPU as much as you would expect. Maybe it will on the 13900K. That's my 13900K testbed. All right, guys, that's it for the show. Come in next week. We will have benchmarks. I will run as much as I can over the next 5 days, 4 days, whatever it is, and we'll have performance results. We'll look at professional applications as much as we're able. I'm going to try to run some AI benchmarks if I can get them working, as well as things like spec view perf and of course gaming performance. This is AMD's fastest GPU that they've ever released for the consumer sector. How much faster is it than the previous generation? We'll find out next week. And how does it scale compared to other cards? How does it stack up against the 4080? I said this maybe I said it in our forums. So I was talking with someone, and basically, if you look at non-ray tracing, non-DLSS performance, so your rasterization games like Borderlands 3 or Flight Simulator or any of these games, right? Take your baseline performance and, then do price performance comparison. And you say, okay, AMD offers you this much performance per dollar, NVIDIA offers you this much performance per dollar. At face value, AMD is always a better value. But then the thing is you do have to somehow account for DLSS and account for better ray tracing performance. And so I've kind of said, subjectively, I can see a lot of people, and the market bears this out, I can see a lot of gamers going, I'm willing to pay 10%, 20% more for the same base level of performance on an NVIDIA card. So if they say, hey, the 6700 XT, and I'm not saying it is, but if the 6700 XT were 20% faster than a 3060 Ti, and they both cost $400, then people would potentially get the slower NVIDIA because they know outside of standard rasterization games, it will be faster in ray tracing and DLSS. Or alternatively, they'd say, well, let's say the 3060 Ti and the 6700 10GB are equivalent performance in rasterization, then they would pay 20% more, up to 20% more, to get NVIDIA's features on top of it. Just because it's not that it just works, Jensen. It's that NVIDIA is big enough and has enough of a market that they can do proprietary crap and shove it down gamers' throats and get game developers to use it. And AMD has to go the open route, which means all their work has to benefit all gamers. That's a lot to say. But, if the 4080 and the 7900 XT are the same performance, hypothetically, and the 4080 costs 20% more, then they're basically, in a lot of gamers' minds, I think that's equal footing. And the gamers have already said the 4080 is too dang expensive. So, not all gamers, but a lot of gamers have. I thought it was too expensive. The 4090 feels like the better deal because I'm like, hey, if you're going to spend $1,200, why not spend $1,600 to get that extra 20 to 30% performance boost? With the AMD, we'll see. I think the 4080 has, like, it might be. I think the 7900 XTX will probably end up faster based on specs and what AMD has said. I think it will beat the 4080. The XT I'm not sure about, and what games favor one, what games favor the other, and how does DLSS factor in. Those are all things to consider. We'll hit that next week. So, all right, guys, have a good weekend, and we will talk to you later.